Hi, I'm Laurie Lebo, your host for today's Centerstone Conversations Grounded in Science. I'm joined by Tom Mahler, retired Air Force colonel with 14 years of experience in the aerospace industry, and for the past 20 years, an integral part of Centerstone's operations as an invaluable member of multiple Centerstone boards of directors. Also, Prasad Kodali, Centerstone's Chief Information Officer and resident expert on all things AI. The term artificial intelligence was first coined in the 1950s. It's been studied for decades and is still one of the most nebulous and elusive subjects in computer science. Yet it has applications in nearly every way that we use technology in society. Tom, your first experience with AI was back in 1972. Can you get us started today with what was happening in the world of AI in the 70s?
Sure, Laurie. Let me take you far away and long ago, okay? Back to 1972, as you say, at the University of Georgia, and what would now be called Terry College and MIS department, but none of those things existed then. In fact, a lot of things didn't exist then. We're talking about a time before there was any desktop or laptop computers. Cell phones were not even a thought at that point. Most work was done on large mainframes that were housed in these big buildings that were carefully temperature controlled and all these things. And most interaction with computers when I started was still done with card decks. And you would go read cards into a reader. You might have to come back the next day to see if your software ran or whatever. We were starting to get into distributed computing with dumb terminals that didn't even have screens. You were just working with paper and getting paper output back. So it was very primitive compared to what we got now. Big mainframes were just starting to become part of a large number of people's lives. And the idea of computing at all was increasingly invading all aspects of business, science, you name it. So we were starting to get really involved with computers, and a lot of us were getting drawn into it without planning to. If you were just doing any kind of work at all, you were likely to be drawn into computer applications and start having to learn how to program and that sort of thing. At that time, the term artificial intelligence, I think the whole world of artificial intelligence was going through a transition from the focus in the early 50s to a new focus, more on applications. And I kind of hit right at that point. And we were really focused on applications as opposed to the more theoretical parts of artificial intelligence. As you said, the theoretical part started in the early 50s with Alan Turing being one of the main geniuses involved in it. And at that time, there was a real emphasis on what British philosopher John Searles would call the hard AI hypothesis. And that was that it might be possible to build a machine, a computer that exactly duplicates the human mind. Okay. And people were really trying to do that. And I guess more power to them, except that it was a really hard thing to do. And that was when Alan Turing came up with his famous Turing test, which was really a thought experiment, is all it was. And he said, look, if we ever reach, he predicted that by the early 2000s, computers would be able to fool, if you tested people with output and tried to make them guess whether a computer or a person was generating the output, people would be wrong 33% of the time. And that gave rise to the Turing test. And there have been in many contests and experiments with it ever since. But even to this day, there's a real argument of whether anybody's ever actually passed a Turing test. But then there's also the soft AI hypothesis, which merely says that it is possible to use computers to duplicate certain types of human thought related to certain type of work processes and kind of do the work, maybe do the tedious part of the work that people are doing and have great success. And in fact, in my experience, that was where we started to have success, and that's where our applications were, and that was the type of work we were doing. We weren't really worried about Alan. I never heard anybody really mention his name in reference to anything I was doing. To give you an idea of how simplistic it could be, the first application I worked on was an application to an AI application to approve loans for banks. Okay. There's a thought process associated with approving loans. Does the person have enough income? What's their total level of debt? They substantially employ just a number of things that bank officers would look at before they approved a loan. It was fairly easy to turn that into computer code. And the computer did what computers always do. They can do things much faster than people, and they can do it over and over again without getting tired or restless. So these types of applications became very effective. We called them expert systems in those days. And that was really expert systems were what got me involved with artificial intelligence. Prior to that point, we hadn't even spoken of AI. We would talk about heuristic programming, which is really programming rules of thumb rather than absolute algorithms and stuff like that. Rules of thumb program very nicely. So this was the kind of thing that was evolving into AI applications, and that's what we got into. And in my experience, I found that you really could be successful. You could really be successful without having to kill yourself. That it was often fairly easy to put together these thought processes and turn them into output, and that they were really useful for people. So a lot of things were starting to happen, and people increasingly accepted it. Now, there was a saying even then that it was AI as long as you were working on it and experimenting with it. Once he implemented it, it was successful. It was no longer AI. It was just code. Well, AI is just code. So, that was where we were, and that was the type of work I did. We also did some neural networking, which was pattern recognition and that sort of thing, but mostly expert systems in my experience. And that continued. I was in the Air Force from 1973 to 1998. And in the late 90s, I did the last thing that I wrote that was an AI application, wherein I was a student at the Industrial College of the Armed Forces, which is one of the war colleges. And I was allowed to program or to actually use a software package to create an automated Air Force promotion board, a piece of software that actually, and this is for the rank of major, they knew how to read the records that come to the promotion board, make the same decisions that members of the promotion board would make, and recommend people for promotion or not. And it was extremely effective. Okay. It was like 98, 99% effective. So it worked a lot better than I thought it would. And my colleagues were terrified. And my colleagues were disgusted. And so was I in a way. Because there are dangers in AI, and I think I've encountered one. When you create a product that looks like it's going to take humans completely out of the loop, with no human eyes on what's going on, you scare people. You don't have to do that. Okay. My little piece of software never went anywhere because it was just an experiment in a school environment. But years later, very few years later, I noticed that computers were being used to kind of double check the work of promotion boards to see if they were producing the output they were supposed to and that sort of thing. So it got applied, but in a different way. But, I did learn, you got to be cautious with the things you do. There can be problems. And of course, there are many things involved in AI, like release of public records. If you're not supposed to put a record out, don't put it on the internet. AI model. It's just been released. So there are things like that you have to work out. But overall, I think the history was very, very successful with expert systems and that sort of things. Their popularity would ebb and flow. I also would say this, that maybe not more than 10% of the U.S. population even knew what any of this was. It was a very narrowly defined field of people that were creating certain type of applications and doing well, but it just wasn't well known. But that's where we were. I moved on to other things. I retired from the Air Force, and I haven't really been involved as deeply in AI until very recently. Prasad asked me a question when we were discussing this in some of our earlier meetings that I thought was pretty interesting. He said, Tom, what is it that you guys are doing back then didn't see coming? And I thought that was an interesting question because we did see a lot of things. We kind of saw the internet's coming. In fact, I think some of us kind of contributed to its development, just integrated systems all over the country. We certainly saw things like email coming, even if we were only using shared alpha files, on commonly accessed computer disks and stuff like that. We certainly did a lot in decision support, not for managers and things like that. But there were some things that I absolutely could not see coming. One of those was Amazon and the computer just taking over the world of marketing. I couldn't visualize that. It's very logical, but I couldn't visualize it. Google search engines, or I should say search engines, because Google isn't the only one. The power that they would generate and the pervasiveness of our lives, the pervasive nature of those things in our lives, I didn't really see coming. And as a result of that, I did not even remotely see the current wave of popular generative AI. The power of the GPT-4s and things like that we're using now to solve all kind of problems, do all kind of research. I did not see coming. I couldn't even imagine that kind of work. The acronym GPT, Generative Pre-trained Transformer. I couldn't have used that in a sentence, much less that I could create an acronym that made sense to anybody with it. So this is all new. It was all new stuff. But I've started using it, and I've started accessing. I use Microsoft Copilot a lot. It has really been powerful. It's really been profound, and it's really made a difference in my life. I'm at this stage of my life, I'm into a lot of people, that sort of thing. I've been helping other people learn to use it, and it's amazing how quickly people pick it up and start generating reports and generating all sorts of things. It's really very easy to use software, and easy is good. So it's amazing what it can do, but the power of what's going on under the hood, what you don't see, is amazing. The ability to penetrate massive amounts of data, to generate answers, and that sort of thing, far exceeds anything that I would ever have thought would have even been possible. So I'm amazed. I'm enjoying using it very much. Like the old days, there are dangers. And now some applications are better than others. One I did. One of the great poets of all time was a guy named Gerard Manley Hopkins. His poetry can be short, terse, use very interesting words, absolutely beautiful, but can be hard to understand. I asked GPT-4 to create a Gerard Manley Hopkins poem for me. It did in about 10 seconds.
Wow.
I had to go back and say, surely you can do better than that. About 20 seconds later, I had one that was better than that. It was a good poem, but it was not a great poem. And I think person writing their own could probably mimic Hopkins better. So be aware of its limitations, use it. Don't be afraid of it. Use it. Be aware of data control and things like that, but don't be afraid of the software. It can be a powerful tool, and it will be. It's going to happen. People are going to be using this stuff no matter what. So, you might as well go along for the ride. This is going to be the technology, and it's going to change. GPT-4 was replaced by GPT-6, 7, entirely different approaches that work nothing like the stuff we're doing now. All of that is coming. And I think the best thing we can do is go along for the ride, be aggressive, be thoughtful. In my way of thinking, focus on what you can do. If I was in Centerstone, what can we do to help our patients and our employees? That's where we need to be focused. Let's don't get too worried about all the theoretical stuff. We'll never produce much. Let's really focus on doing good applications that can really help people and understand what we expect to get out of it. And I think it'll be enormously beneficial. So that's where we are right now, in my opinion.
Thank you, Tom. You bring up many great points and a wonderful segue to Prasad. I want to go back to what you said about how the importance of keeping human eyes on things and not letting the technology take over, not letting AI take over where humans need to be involved. And I think that's a great point for behavioral health care, where we are inherently human-centered. And Prasad, I want to pass it over to you to share what's happening with Centerstone right now with AI. Where are we going? How are we using it? And what concerns do we have, should we have, and how are we controlling for those things?
Right. Thank you so much, Tom. First of all, I appreciate the actual lived history with AI. I think that's always interesting, how we as people interact with technology and how that changes over time, and by the changes of environmental influences, etc. So I'm going to start off with a statement, and the statement that I will make is that I believe that, and this is at core of why I believe that we should adopt AI. I can tell you that we started looking at AI from the prompting of David Guth, our CEO, who also got advice from board members and other consultants, people from outside the organization, about that this new technology was coming. And so I believe that AI is groundbreaking technology that will change our society much in the way that the internet changed our society. Now, after sort of stating that premise, let me talk about why a person like me, a technologist, likes my field, likes to do the work that I do. The reason why, and I believe if you distilled it down, that all technologists love doing the work in the field of technology, is because they want to use technology to change the world for better. That's the core premise of anything that a technologist would want to do. They want to use technology to change the world for better. Now, obviously, I would tell you that if you invent a new, neat, incredibly new technology that seems to have lots of potential, but no one uses it, then it doesn't fill that core mission of using technology to change the world for the better. And so I'll give you an example. I'll start with this. So if you think about telehealth, if we go back before the pandemic, I think less than 1% of Centerstone services were delivered via telehealth. And the problem was not the technology. We had the technology in place to do telehealth almost everywhere. In fact, by the time that the pandemic rolled around, thank goodness that we did, because it really helped us get through it. But the barrier was that patients were not willing to do it. They just felt more comfortable coming in and having their service face to face. And so very few people were willing to try it. Then we had this, monumental impact on our society by the pandemic and everybody having to be home. And Centerstone shifted to a place where at one point we were 75% of all our services were done via telehealth. So just imagine that change from less than 1% to over 75%. Now that I'm not going to say the pandemic's over, it's not, it's past though. Let's say the bulk of it's changed, and we're starting to get back to, if we've not gotten back to already, sort of some of our norms. But now you see society as a whole, certainly most of our patients in almost all verticals of healthcare, many of them are willing to do appointment by telehealth. The reason why is the convenience of it. The fact that you don't have to get dressed, and you don't have to drive, or you don't have to take transportation to your appointment, sit and wait, and then have your appointment, and then return trip back to home or wherever you need to go next. If you remove all that, that's almost feels like wasted time now. And so many patients are very willing to have their service done by telehealth, unless there's a really strong reason, let's say doing a lab, or doing some follow-up, or a physical examination or something like that, and it needs to be done in person. So, even though telehealth was a groundbreaking technology, certainly for the healthcare field, the fact that people were willing to do it is what made it change, right? And so I think we had something similar happen in AI. I would tell you, I started reading about AI 4, 5, 6 years ago. I saw all these investment dollars, the capital markets, investment banks putting money into companies, or companies putting money into companies to invest in AI. But for a long time, we didn't really see any functionality. And then the way I like to say it is November, December 2022, a bomb went off, and the bomb was ChatGPT and OpenAI releasing that to the public. And when people started using it and seeing the power of asking the internet a question, or asking the internet, you know, artificial intelligence or augmented intelligence to do a task, and it does it, and it does it in a way that I would say that's efficient and standard or above standard. It may not be brilliant, like Tom pointed out too, but it gives you a good working answer, or it gives you a good working result to something that you asked it. Instantly, we had millions of people start to create free accounts on ChatGPT, OpenAI ChatGPT, and they realized the power of it. Well, now you could say society was no longer, the pendulum sort of shifted, and instead of all the stories coming out from all the science fiction movies about artificial intelligence and how it'll take over the world and enslave or kill off the humans or whatever the case may be, to now, hey, this technology has real world applications and it can truly make the world better. And so I want to use it. And we looked at it from the standpoint as, and let me just say this, I'm not saying there'll not be another technology that comes along that's even better, but let me say this, artificial intelligence or augmented intelligence represents the best hope for us to improve the EHR. And then if you can follow this vision, and it's a vision that I've had talked to me about a board member at a company that we do business with, he put it so eloquently that I reuse it, is that we want to turn the EHR from being a burden that all our clinicians have to enter data in, and it caused them extra work, and they don't believe that it adds to the clinical session that they're providing to the patient, to where that EHR then becomes an autonomous robot that records what happens in that session and takes the burden of that data entry, of that documentation off of the clinician, lets them provide the clinical service, and does that task for them. When it goes from a burden, and AI has the potential to do this right now, it's the best hope currently, not saying another technology will come out that'll even improve that more, but when it can take something that's a burden and make it something that helps the clinician, well, that makes all of healthcare better. And so I believe that that's why we've adopted it, and why it's important to adopt it, because I think this is the best way to help our clinicians do their job. And I think from the standpoint of my seat, which is really the role of the chief technologist, I would say all my decisions should orbit around the fact that, does this decision make the lives of our clinicians easier? Because at the end of the day, we're a care delivery organization, and the role of the technology department is to help those caregivers give care. And so that's what I would say about AI while we're adopted. Another thing that I want to talk about, and this ties back to what Tom was talking about, which was about hard and soft AI, and he sort of referred to, some people were trying to build AI, artificial intelligence, where it replaced the human. And then there's other AI which is purpose built to do a job, like ChatGPT. And so the way, Ashley Newton, who's our CEO of the Institute, and myself, we talk about it, is we talk about replacement technology and assistive technology. So the way we've written our policy for our artificial intelligence at Centerstone is that we want it to be an assistive technology. In other words, we're not going to be adopting technologies that will replace our clinicians or replace something that they do, but what we'll do is help assist. It will assist them do their job. And I don't think it'll only impact just our clinical staff. It'll also impact administrative staff. Meaning that, could it help our billers, get our claims out the door and get them paid? Could it help our HR staff review applications? Could it help our accounting people, produce reports, do all kinds of things with data collection and data retrieval for our accounting staff? So there's many possibilities where AI can help us, and I think adopting it is only going to make our organization better and more efficient. And so Centerstone, we are heading into the world of AI, knowing that there's many new companies, and then there will be some growing pains because the technology companies are new and the technologies are new, but also knowing that this represents the current best hope to make the jobs of all our staff easier, which I think is very important. It's a very important goal to set and then of course work towards. It would be wrong for me not to talk about this topic and not really mention this. Is, you know, our AI policy is written not only to really say it's an assistive technology, but it caused us as Centerstone to set up an AI governance committee that has people from all different facets of the organization to then come together and to address any issues that patients bring up or staff bring up, to make sure that we're addressing them in a manner that's fair and equitable, and making sure that we're doing the best thing possible with ourselves and our vendor and the data that we put into these systems, to make sure that we eliminate bias as much as possible. This is a new area of technology. I'm not going to say that we'll always eliminate, but what I'm trying to say is that we're making sure as an organization that we're taking steps to make sure that the implementation of AI is not only assistive technology, but is also fair and equitable for all the people that work in this at Centerstone, regardless of what job you perform. And I'll pause there and hand it back to you, Laurie.
Yeah, thank you, Prasad. What I heard you say is that Centerstone's goal is not to replace humans, but to use AI to make hard work easier. And that's the path that we're taking, and it's exciting to see, you know, to hear about where we are and what we're using, what we're doing, how we're using AI, and, you know, to think about what we might be able to do in the future. You know, when you talk about the AHR in particular, I think of, you know, our therapists and the people who are providing care to change people's lives. If you take away that burden of the EHR, that really frees up so much time for us to deliver more care. And we have, you know, then the resource of the EHR to be supportive rather than a burden. And so pleased to hear that that's what we're doing and we're heading in that direction. You know, I think about the history, you know, for 7 decades, computer scientists have stretched and flexed to use AI to really push the limits of the impossible. I think artificial intelligence both scares us and intrigues us. And, you know, when looking in the kind of studying the history of AI in preparation for this conversation, I also took a peek at what's the future of AI? What are people saying about what's going to happen next? And according to some experts, singularity, which is this idea of a theoretical future event at which computer intelligence can surpass that of humans. Something like that may occur as soon as 2060, which is, you know, for some of us in our lifetime. And, you know, I have to think, what happens then? What does that look like? And I guess we will just have to wait and see what happens then. Many thanks to Tom Mahler and Prasad Kodali for a great conversation. To our audience, see you next time for Centerstone Conversations, Grounded in Science.